Thanks for coming all the way over here to listen to an American talk about something that you don't have yet. I appreciate it. It is coming. You can play with it. But I've been fortunate enough to play around with Alexa for just the past 8 months, in addition to other voice assistant work I do with Google and Cortana. And this is such a lot of fun. It is very developer friendly. And since I'm a .NET dev, I thought, wait, can we interface with this and extend the kind of stuff that we normally have? So that's kind of why I decided to play around with it. And now I've done over 14 different prototypes for very, very large companies in the world to kind of show them what they can do with it. And I'm having a great time. So I thought, why not share it with all of you, right? If you haven't met me before, my name is Heather Downing. I do a little bit of everything, is what we say. I'm a technologist. So in this instance, I do a whole bunch of work around mobile. I do quite a bit of API work, and of course, any sort of device-driven development. I also do hobbies on the side. I'm a horseback archery competitor, as well as a semi-professional photographer. So if any of you all would like a picture afterwards, let me know, and I promise you I will give you the best try. All right, so the reason that we wanted to drive this home to developers is because of this right here. Everybody familiar with what Gartner is? Yes? Excellent. They predict that by 2018, 30% of our interactions with technology will be through conversations with smart machines. Well, that's pretty specific. That's just around the corner a few months from now. And that's the whole world, not just the US. And there are over 12,000 skills available currently in the Amazon Alexa store. That's huge. That's enormous. Unfortunately, 69% of them have 1 or no reviews. 1 star, low reviews, terrible experiences. I'm sure you've probably gone through that before, but just in case you haven't, there's actually a very famous skit from Saturday Night Live that kind of goes into how funny it can be to interact with a voice assistant and have it not really understand what it is you want or what it is you're trying to accomplish. And so just to kind of put things into a user perspective for all of you, here's an example of one of those reviews. This poor guy just wanted to lock his doors and check to see if they were locked. And he was smart enough to know, now not most users are not this aware, he was smart enough to know that the company that made his car didn't have enough foresight to think maybe we just want to check to see if your door is locked, to not lock it again and again and again and again and again. What this is a fantastic tool with lazy development. That is really what it is. Because at the end of the day, we have all the power. If somebody who's non-technical, whether your boss, your client, or what have you, ask you, is this possible? And your answer is no. They will believe you because they are not the technical person. So if you say, no, happy path, that's it, done, then this is what happens, right? So I'm here to kind of persuade you in 2 pieces. I'm going to go over what it means to develop for the voice world. So it's a little bit of design, a little bit of intuition there. And then we're actually going to go and code one at the very end here. Sound good? Good deal. So why should you even build for voice? If you're at a larger company that maybe is a bank or insurance company that maybe doesn't do a fun startup, why would you even care about this? You should absolutely care about this because longer-lasting products have tapped into the basic utility that when applied with this new kind of technology made life better in some way. And a good example of this is maybe frequently asked questions. We all hate that static page. We all hate that thing. And guess who else hates it? Our users. Users don't like it, especially if it's buried under menus and collapsed and submenus. And by the time you finally find what the answer is to your tax question, you're exhausted just trying to get to that answer. This is where voice can really shine, because then somebody could just ask the darn question and get the darn answer. That is where it shines through. It makes it better. It's certainly not something I would choose to do for a long form kind of interaction, because nobody wants to rattle off every single piece of their personal details for 20 minutes with a voice assistant. That's not very fun, and it would be better if maybe I use something tactile for that. But when it comes to accessibility, it's really big to understand that there are plenty of people in the world without sight. Okay? So this works really well for them, in addition to people who just are not tech savvy. So my mom really dislikes mobile apps, and I'm a mobile developer. So this is the one place that we met in the middle, is that she didn't have to be trained how to talk. She knew how to just start having a conversation, and she didn't know where to find this in the Uber app. Like, that was hard for her, but she could just ask a question, and my Google Assistant took care of it for her, and she liked that interface. And so this is going to become more and more a part of our lives as developers, and it's important that we understand why, so we don't grumble too much about it, and instead embrace it and put it as another tool in our tool belt. So let's talk about the approach. Paul Grice is considered the grandfather of NLP, of voice design, and when it comes to communication. Okay? He said there's only 4 things that matter when you're communicating: the quality of what you're saying, how brief you are, the relevance of what it is, and how clear you are. Even if you're talking to somebody in another culture, in another country, that maybe doesn't have the same life experiences as you, as long as you stick to these 4, you're probably communicating well. Now, we are a tremendous group of talented people that are not very good at communicating. So that's why I decided to put a couple of things in here, because it matters. Because at the end of the day, we're the ones developing the conversation. That brings me to the cooperative principle. Has anybody heard of this before? No? Great. Fresh ears. All right. This is an example, maybe, of what the happy path versus a cooperative path might look like. We are used to something on the left. The user asks to set an alarm. The UI says it's normal response. The user gives every single piece of detail that you need in order to carry out your function, and then you get a response to the user. But in reality, that doesn't often happen, especially when people are talking to these devices when they're distracted, like when they're trying to cook dinner, or they're trying to wrangle their children, or they're trying to run around the house. They're going to forget to give you pieces of data. So, in the happy path, you basically would tell them that they are an exception, like in a bad way. You are an exception. I can't handle you. Error, no. The problem is there's not really errors in conversation. In reality, there's misunderstandings. And when there's misunderstandings, it isn't necessarily a misunderstanding of the entire statement, maybe only a piece of it. That's reality, right? You might get this, this, and this of what I just said, but maybe not that part, right? So if we retain context as we go of the things we did understand, that's cooperative. That's a cooperative conversation. And so that's why this exchange is better. Your user says they want to set an alarm. You give your normal response, and they only give a piece of information. In this case, it would be one of the parameters that you need to carry out your function. And instead of putting up I didn't understand what you said, you retain that and acknowledge that the user gave you some data and just ask for the next piece. Instead of making them repeat it all over again, because it's very clunky to do that, this is how we should be coding. It's very important that we embrace this concept. So that way, it feels like a natural conversation. That brings me to one of my favorite parts of this whole thing, which is conversational implicature. Isn't that fun? Kind of goes something like this. Jacob says, I really need a drink. And Todd says, have you been to the Scotsman? That's the end of the conversation, right? There's a lot implied there. What's being implied is that this particular establishment serves drinks. They happen to be alcoholic because of the tone of voice. It's open for business, it's nearby, and it's a place where I might like because I was also standing in the room when Jacob said that. And so I was included in the answer by a human being because they could see that I was there. So there's so much that happens here. This is where voice breaks down for us, because we're like, we don't have eyes. We don't know that there's another person in the room. There's no way that we can apply all these things. Oh, but you can. Absolutely you can. This is important, especially as we start to anticipate things for users. So instead of asking them the same questions over and over, like where are you, maybe you retain that information. Maybe you start to build a profile outside of this skill about your user, so you don't have to ask a whole bunch of additional questions. Because how this might go would be, okay, Alexa, tell me where to get a drink. Okay, where do you want to get a drink? Sydney. Okay, do you want a juice bar? Do you want a bar? Do you want, what do you want? Then it goes on, and it's very cumbersome. But if I only really ask that question on Fridays and Saturdays after 8 p.m., there might be something implied there. It's possible. Now, it is culturally based, so please understand what somebody does in India is not what somebody does in the US, and what somebody does in Australia is apparently not what some people do in New Zealand. And so, there's a lot that you have to consider. So voice is also culturally based, and you will do a skill per culture. If you're interested in the documentation of what we're going over today, you can head on over to developer.amazon.com/Alexa, and it's all there ready for you to go. This is a wonderful thing that changes approximately every 3 to 4 weeks, so make sure that you visit often. So let's say I've convinced you and we want to build a skill. There's actually several more that have come out in the past few months, but the ones that I want to differentiate are these 3. Flash briefing is something that's like an RSS feed that's spoken by Alexa, along with every other RSS feed on a daily basis, okay? This works really well on something like a angry tweet of the day, reading that out. Maybe that would be a great skill for you to build, just to play with it, and it's just something that comes to the user as just part of the batch of their morning routine. Then there's a smart home skill. Now, it's called smart home, but what this really means is that you will use Alexa to interface with something, and she doesn't need to speak back to you. You just need to control the actual device. And it could be anything. It could be something that's already predisposed to this, like maybe a Bluetooth light bulb, or one of several different garage and window openers, or it could be a Raspberry Pi that's hooked up to something else. So this is a smart home skill, works really well for that, and there's more and more devices that are growing every day, but you can always build your own. But what we're going to focus on is a custom skill. A custom skill takes up the majority of the skills that you see inside of the Alexa store, and it kind of goes like this. The user asks a question, and then Alexa's processes look at it. So Alexa is powered by Lex. Isn't that fun? Lex is the NLP processor that Amazon owns. It's very, very good. It makes conversation a lot easier, and there are many other competitors, but this part they do extremely well. And so yes, we can absolutely do NLP on our own, but that would take way more than the time that I have to show you today. So let's suffice it to say, somebody has solved NLP for us and given us an endpoint in which to interact with, right? So now the interesting stuff begins. Now we can apply our business logic to it and go from there. And that's what we do in that third box over there, is that we get to have a service or a function that handles whatever the request is and sends it back in a specific JSON format over to Alexa, and then Alexa will then speak it to the user. Additionally, underneath it as an option, there is an app that goes along with Alexa that allows you to do summaries or screens. You can have videos in there. You can have it completely tailored in HTML and CSS. It can look really nice. It can be back and forth per request or just for the whole session. So there are additional things you can also push out to the app. This is a great, that right here actually allowed me to discover that my 11-year-old across the street neighbor, I say across the street, I live in an apartment building, walls are thin, and it's not a very big hallway, that would come up apparently to my front door, which is where my Echo is sitting, and shout through the door at my device and get what the weather was today. And eventually, it understood what she was saying. And she has a very heavy accent, being from Afghanistan. Okay? It's very, very heavy, but it only took a couple of times for a sub-profile to be created for her, and so it got to be faster and faster to respond to her. And every time she would do it, it doesn't ding me or anything, but I would just kind of look through the app going, oh, Marietta used my Echo today. You can tell. And so that's really what that's for, is an additional Recall, it's great for recipes. If you don't want the user to have to remember everything and you want them to have it to be written down, this is given to you for free, and all of the Echo device owners have it. So let's talk about the components to what a skill is. The first one is intense. This is an intense subject. No laughter. And basically, it's just events. And this is true across any sort of voice assistant work that you do. This is the intention that you're trying to fulfill. Okay? It kind of looks like this coming over from Alexa when it sends it over and hits your endpoint. This is the data that you will see for that. It'll have a name of the intent, which is basically the event that you're trying to tie to a function. Okay? It doesn't have a whole lot here. Notice that there could be more than one slot of data. That means that's something that you need from the user, like remember how we went over the happy path versus the cooperative path? Maybe this is the time of day, maybe it's their name, maybe it's the location, what have you. This is an array that can hold all of that for you. Then there's sample utterances. Now, utterances in general are used across the board. For some reason, Amazon wanted to call it sample utterances, because really what it's doing is some fuzzy logic. If you don't say exactly what one of the sentences are, but it's close, it will basically try to figure it out for you. It might be wrong and send it to the wrong intent, but it will try. So it's important that we train, just like machine learning, train a model for what it is we want to do. And did you know how many different ways there are to say hello? Depends on where you're from, how fast you say it, and what have you. So there can be many, many, many versions of an utterance to invoke one intent, which is, of course, a function. Example, just asking the time, it could be any one of these things. And the more that you add, the better it becomes. The better it is across the board for more than one person. Now, the reality is, if this is in a home, you're probably only going to say it one way because you get used to it. But it's great for parties when you have all your friends over and she doesn't respond to anybody but the user that has it in their home, because they're used to just saying one thing. So if you want to be able to make this fun for like a game, maybe some sort of trivia game that you play with multiple people, it's important that you have different ways to say what it is you want to do. Then there's the invocation name. So this is the important part that people always ask me, do we have to have this part? It's so cumbersome. But yes, how many different websites do you think there is for weather? I mean, so if you ask her, what is the weather? She has a default on there that Amazon gives you for free that's defaulted to NOAA. Okay, that's the weather that she pulled it from. But if I was to build a weather skill based around what the weather's like for the eclipse, that's coming up in a couple of days, which skills are we talking to? There is only 55 Alexa skills based on the eclipse, so which one? And this is where the invocation name comes in. This is your domain name. This is your DNS, okay, right here. This is what is used to identify your skill. And in the future, it'll become more commonplace. It isn't an option right now, but eventually you will be able to start to default to certain skills that you want, but it isn't possible right now, but probably will be by next year. And of course, your cloud service. So when I say service, what I'm really talking about is all the business logic. It's where it lives. It doesn't have to be a formal web service. It could be, AWS Lambda function. They would love for you to do that, and so you certainly can. It could be Firebase. You could decide what you want to do. One of the most fun projects I had seen is somebody who controlled their slides during the presentation through Alexa. It was fantastic, and they did that directly through Firebase. So there's lots of ways you can connect it, and that's what I mean when I talk about cloud services. But for our purposes, we mean Azure. Something on Azure called Web API. And then, of course, portal configuration. You will spend more time here than you thought possible. And that's because this is where it all comes together, where the rubber meets the road. That means this is the place where you will put your schema of intents. That means these are the intended behaviors I have, and then they will be mapped to all those utterances. And the more the merrier. The average skill has over 300 utterances that maps to maybe 7 to 8 intents. Okay? Because they're trying to cover their bases when people are saying things partially or what have you. This also controls the publishing of your skill and allows you to put information in like your terms of service and your contract. Then there are these visual components that I had talked about earlier. This is kind of what it would look like. This is the default UI if you don't really want to mess too much with the visual end of it, because I'm a backend developer and I can't CSS. This is kind of what you get by default. It's pretty nice, pretty clean, and you can just send it directly in. This is kind of what it looks like. Or maybe you get fancy, okay? Maybe you want to not only have her speak in return, but have a tethered screen. So this example here on the slide is Goodness, which is Nestle, the company Nestle, and they wanted to do some sort of healthy eating website, and they wanted to predict whether or not you were at home cooking with it, just looking at it on the go, or you weren't anywhere near a computer, but you wanted to use the Echo. So the way that they did this is with WebSockets. That's what they did for this. So they used SignalR and pushed it out. Anytime somebody asked, give me a recipe about blank, then this would not only answer the question, but show the options on the screen at the same time. It's very, very cool. It's a great thing to do. We did this in Kansas City, the Kansas City Developer Conference, and it was a huge hit because instead of waiting for the scrolling out there to see when a specific speaker or session was going to go, you could just ask the question and it pulled it up for you. No touching of the screen required. It's pretty fun to do. And there's a lot that you can do here with kids, especially when it comes to building a story time thing or a choose your own adventure kind of a concept. I'm sorry, what?
They've got the new Echo Show.
Yeah.
So does it use put this in that display?
So the Echo Show I will talk to you about at the very end, but this has to do with just a screen somewhere else that is listening for you to push data through a WebSocket. Okay, great. And of course, here's our cloud-based service. And these are the requirements as they stand today. It will probably change tomorrow, but this is what they are right now. You're welcome to look at this. I'll put my slide deck up later for you guys. But basically what it means is this. Yet you can't have a skill that doesn't make sense to a user, and they have an entire team that will try to break it for you. It's kind of nice, because that way I don't have to hire people to do this for me. No, I'm kidding. You should test your stuff before you send it into Amazon. It's actually more difficult to get a skill through Amazon than it is through the Apple's store. So just keep that in mind. And this is why. To a user, this is Alexa. It's not you. It's not your skill. It's this. So they don't want you to mar the experience of their user if it's bad, if it's a bad experience. And so they try to break it. So that's basically what that means. You have to make sure you can hit the internet at all times, so make sure that your service is always on. You need to make sure that it's secure. And we'll go into that a little bit. And also make sure you validate that all the requests coming in are from Alexa and not somebody else. That brings me to custom slots and built-in intents. So this is kind of what that structure looks like as you're trying to go through and decide what it is you're going to say. The name of your intent and maybe your utterance. And then there's what we call slots. And that's just, it could be a predefined list of things they could say. Like in this case, it would be Virgo or Leo or Sagittarius, and not necessarily surfing. Right? You can do that, or you can make it kind of an open-ended slot. And that means you have to train it a little more, but that means you can take in just a little part of a sentence all the way up to about 8 or 9 words. So let's take a look at what this portal thing looks like, shall we? All right. So whenever you go to developer.amazon.com and click on Alexa, you will go into the Alexa Skills Kit. And these are examples of some of the skills that I've played with, of course. One that I'm really fond of is my LCARS skill. Does anybody know what LCARS stands for? Nope. Does anybody know what LCARS is? Yes. Yes, it is the Star Trek ship computer name. And there's an entire suite of images and sounds that you can get from the internet completely free. And I'm a huge Star Trek geek, and so I decided that I wanted to talk to her just like Captain Picard could talk to the computer on board the ship. And so that's what I built here. And this is kind of pre-populated to make it easier for you. And so this is just the name. This would be the invocation name right here on the front. Notice how, even though it's an abbreviation, I thought it would be easier to kind of spell it out phonetically. You don't always have to do that. And in the case of what we're going to build, you would maybe use just period after it to indicate that that's what it is. It just seems to work better when I make it sound like something Spanish. All right, so down here at the bottom, you see there's audio player, video app, and rendering template. Earlier, I had a question about the Echo Show. It uses a rendering template for that, and that's an additional device that came out this year. But for our purposes for this custom skill, we don't need to do any of these, but just know that they are there as options, okay? All right, that leads us to our interaction model page. You will spend the most time here. You can also play around with their skill builder. It's in beta right now. But if you're just like me and you just kind of want to take the file that's important and just paste it where it needs to go, this is your friend. So right here is your intent schema. Notice how it has a list of intents. Some of them have slots and some of them do not. This is where you indicate what that is, and this is what Alexa uses while parsing NLP in order to route the request to the correct intent. Okay? Over here is custom slot types. Here's the example of just your own data type. Okay? In this case, all of these are a list that you're allowed to choose from. You're not allowed to choose from anything else but this list. If you wanted to edit it, you just hit edit, and then you can put in whatever you'd like here. Okay? And here are sample utterances. Notice how many different ways to say hello I put in there. Here on the left is the name of your intent. And then after that is that one-to-many relationship. So this is how it parses through all the intents and sees if they can match up at all, okay? All right, so now that we've looked at this, let's look at the configuration page itself. In this case, on the endpoint, notice that they even put recommended for you to use AWS Lambda, but I found in a speed test that Azure was faster. So, you know, that may change, you never know, but I found it was faster, and so I decided to just host it on my own service on Azure, and this just said to pick the geographic region that's closest to your target customers. Now, right now, we have North America and Europe, but we all know that most of S3 came over to Australia, and they're going to be adding more and more. Germany was also added as an additional language. So she can speak in German as well. And of course, if I choose UK, then she has a lovely British accent. But because I'm American, I'm going to leave it with an American accent. And here is account linking. This is the important part where you're able to link your own separate federated profiles with whatever profile is on this device by this user. And we don't have to do that for this skill, but just know that this is where you would enable that, and that requires the user to consent whenever they enable a skill, okay? And of course, additional permissions. So as of right now, if the user registered their device with an address, instead of you asking them all the time, where are you? Maybe you can get that directly and just handle it from there. A lot of users don't register it, but it's nice if it's there. Maybe you can check for it. And this is also their list for reads and lists for write. This is a list where you just say, Alexa, add this to my shopping list, or add this to this list, or whatever it is. This gives you access to that core list feature if you need it. Maybe you just need to read from it. Maybe you need to give it. Maybe you want to do some sort of a, what does my wife want for her birthday? And I know that she keeps this list with Alexa. Maybe I'll just, you know, have suggestions. Maybe that's a good suggestion skill. Somebody should build that. And then once you've checked all the boxes, we go down to security. Now, because we've chosen Azure, our development endpoint is a subdomain of a domain that it has a wildcard certificate from a verified certificate authority. So we don't have to worry about rolling our own. You certainly can, but it's nice to not have to. And then once you've checked all those boxes off, your skill is now enabled to test. Yay, right? There are two things you can look at here. If you don't own one of these devices, this is a great place to know how it sounds to do anything. So maybe you could just say hello and then listen to it. Hello. And then you can hear what her voice would sound like, okay? But what we find is the most interesting is this part. saying an utterance and seeing if you get anything in response. So if I say hi, I now can see the JSON that's sent and also that's in reply, okay? Really important. You can go directly to JSON and do that on this tab as well, but I just found that this is easier. And then down here at the bottom,
yes, Commander.
she'll actually respond, right? You can listen to the whole point. And right down here is kind of a little bit of a example of what it would look like in the card, because that's all I sent is whatever the text was. I just sent that to the card, and that's a good way to do it. So this is pretty much what it takes for you to just get rolling and play with it immediately. The great thing is if you do have one of these devices and you log in with that same account to the developer portal, you're automatically enabled to use the skill. It's yours to test immediately. And you don't actually ever have to publish it if you don't want to. You can just use it at your house. I do that all the time. I love to create skills with kids, and so this is what we do, is they each make their own, and they can use it the whole day. It always works on this device, because this device is signed in to my developer account, right? So that's just something to keep in mind if you decide you don't want to open your skill up to the rest of the world. This is great that they already have that enabled. But should you be interested in publishing, then you'd have to register it with a whole bunch of information like the description, what kind of interaction it is. They even give you sample phrases. They're pretty helpful in this regard. It also shows that you have to update any of the icons that will be shown in your Alexa app and also in the Alexa store. The user may never see the icon once they interact with it, but it's required nonetheless. And of course, privacy and compliance. We tend to forget this part. If you are working on a skill with a team, this is great for the project manager to go do with the client, saying, hey, while I build this, why don't you put together a privacy policy and a terms of service and I can link it to. That's great for them to do. All right, so now that we have done all of this, I think we've done the portal tour. Let's look at a code example, shall we? All right. Yes, I'm running a VM on a Mac. All right. Be my friend. Please be my friend. No. Yes. Okay. Exciting. All right. So now what we had just done, we could have done just in my good old friend here, right? We could have just tested that whole thing. Wow, that looks very large. We could have just tested this whole thing using like Fiddler or something else like that, but it's just kind of nice and convenient that it's built into the portal for us, especially since we have all the other tools and how she sounds kind of at our fingertips here. All right, so it's important to note, has anybody in here not familiar with what it's like to publish on Azure? Awesome, don't have to go over that, great. So basically, when I set up this new skill, oh my goodness, it is just a little large here. Okay, well, okay. That is crazy. Yeah, maybe not. Let's try this one.
720.
Oh, you want to do 720? Thank you. Okay, there we go. Nope. Sorry about this, guys. I'm like, what is happening? This was where we were before, right? We're just going to go through this. It's going to be fun. All right. Any other guesses? This one? I don't know. This still looks rather big. All right. Why not? Let's just try the biggest one and see what happens. Okay, that's better. You can all see that then, clearly. Good deal. All right, so basically all I did was do a file new project, right? Which we can do here. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that solution and do that here. So if I'm just starting out a new project, You can decide whatever it is. This looks so strange. All right, hopefully you can still follow along since you're all smart and you've all done this in Azure before. We can call this whatever we'd like. So how about just NDC Sydney? All right. And I decided that I want to go ahead and do Web API project. I initially check host in the cloud, so I can just set all that up right now, and I don't have to worry about this at all. And in this case, this is a very, very ugly URL. Don't like it. Gonna change it. All right. So for my purposes, I actually set this up in the West US, but it actually works just fine here. And I have a plan in Australia East here. See? Woo. All right. Okay. And so I think we're good here. Oh, somebody else took that. Oh, that's terrible. Let's try that. Yes. No one has it. All right. So now while it's setting that up, I can go ahead and just grab into Web API. There's 3 things that we need just to get this to run. And that is your intent schema, remember? Sample utterances. And you need to put just a basic, let's see if we can hit the endpoint and get her to say something, okay? I will do this in a couple of ways. All right, so here, yeah, we have a new .NET application. We're excited. And while that is loading, oh my goodness. There we go. Right, so here's our intent schema. Okay, this is all you need right here. There's an important part here is to know that we have to overload some of the help, the stop, and the cancel intents. They expect you to customize this to whatever it is you want to do with it, but it's important that you implement it. So this is how we would implement something that's already defaulted by using the Amazon namespace and referring to the intent. And this is our neat Hello World intent. Hooray! Right? So then you would copy this, and you would go back out to our portal here. There we go. Our NDC Sydney portal here. And then you would go to the interaction model, right? And just paste it right in here. Okay. The next thing that we need to do is get all the sample utterances that I've got right there. Okay. And that's all you need there. Next, you'd go to the configuration. And whenever they decide to give you that lovely URL, you'd put it right here. And in this case, I went ahead and already pre-built this demo to hit with SSML. Okay, SSML is speech synthesis markup language. It's fun. It's been out for about 10 years, and I've got a slide deck to help you out with that in just a little bit. So all we need to do is set that up there, and then we are good to test. So if you want to, you could again do this in Fiddler or whatever you'd like, or you can just use the page. So in this case, I just want to know that I can hit it, right? Let me just hit this. It could be boo, I don't know. Right, I just want to know that I can hit it. So this would be where you would do that. All right, so now that we're all built up here, well, I swear this looked great right before you walked in. What we need to do here is add an Alexa controller, okay? So we're going to add that. And it's just an empty controller, that's all we need. It's like so crazy. All right, and then I've got that set up here already. Okay. There's a couple of things going on here that I wanted to point out to you. All I'm doing here is hello world. I just want to know that I can hit it and she can say something. Clearly, this is not best practices. If you're going to be building a skill, just hard code everything in here with the dynamic object. But I still want to show you the minimum amount that Alexa needs in order to do her job. Okay, so we have to put a version in there of your skill at the time. You have to, even if it's just empty, you have to send it whether or not you want any session attributes that are set. Session attributes are the one little gift that Amazon gives us. So right now, this is a stateless kind of an interaction, okay? So this is the one little piece of state that they give you. You're allowed to put anything you want in here, and it's only alive during the session, okay? So you can decide it's just a key value pair, it's just a dictionary, shove things in there, and then reference them later, okay? That's a great way to determine whether or not somebody is on step 1 of their recipe or step 5. And then, of course, Alexa goes to sleep because it takes you 10 minutes to make cookie dough, right? So when you just say, Alexa, what is the next step in my recipe? You don't have to look it up. You can just be like, oh, here's your next step. That's a great place to put it, is in a session attribute to go, this is the last step that was done, okay? In this case, the response object is what is needed. You need to at least outline a basic card and the type and the text for what you want her to say. Okay, so there's a couple of different types you can do. The one that I had pre-built for this was an SSML type, but in this case, this is just plain text. This is the easiest way to get started. It's just plain text, literally read the string, please. This is interesting because if you decide that you want to use some sort of data from somewhere else, like Twitter, emoticons are not spoken, so you have to scrub that data before you give it to her. This is a literal say this exact phrase. Okay, so you have to be careful. There's a whole bunch of extra codes everywhere. She will just ignore it, or she will crash. Okay, depends on what it is. Okay, and then this down here is important. Should end session. That means that her little ring will immediately stop after she's delivered the result. Okay, this is what they look for when whether or not they approve a skill or not in the store. So they said once you've given somebody value, remember those 4 maxims. Once you've given somebody value, be done, right? But maybe you're not. Maybe it's a 3-step process. Maybe you ask a question, you get a little more information, then you need to keep that session alive. So that means that that might be a false. But for our purposes, it's not. So this is basically all you need to slap into our controller, okay? My goodness. I'm so sorry. So this is all you need for that. And as long as I save it and then I right-click publish, to Azure, as long as I've got that endpoint, then we can give it a go, right? So you can either test it here and see that she actually did give something back. And you can have her speak it here. Or if it's connected, you can say, Alexa, ask NDC Sydney to say hello.
Hello, Aussies.
Great. So we basically just built that in 10 minutes. Sans my weird resolution, right? That was that quick to do. Now you could certainly go far out from here and do way more. And for our purposes, I want to go back to my slide deck here and kind of talk about debugging. Okay. Yay, debugging. So this looked great. We basically deployed it to production and made it work, right? But what about debugging? Can we do it locally? No. Cannot do it locally. This is a service-driven device. And there is no way for me to plug directly into it and mess with it. It has to be somewhere. It has to reach out to the internet in order to get its information, okay? Which is really fun to do whenever she says, there's a problem with the requested skills response. You will hear that often, which means you've got an exception, okay? And so when that occurs, this is where Azure really shines, because we've got remote debugging, right? Who here has never heard of remote debugging? Great. See, you guys are so far ahead of the curve. So I can tell you that this is where I would just set a breakpoint, start talking to her, or go ahead and use my simulator, and immediately catch what the heck is going on. So that's what you can do here, and that's what kind of makes it a little bit better from doing this on AWS. In case you didn't know, this is kind of how you do it. You publish, and then bam, you can hit it. Yay. So this is all really exciting, right? But what about expression? Because right now, she sounds pretty cool, but how do you get more expressive, right? There's some amazing things that can be done with speech synthesis markup, okay? So who here has heard of speech synthesis markup before? Yeah, okay, so a couple of you. So that means some people have messed around with skills. I like it. It's really fun. This is an example of one. Think about it as HTML, CSS for the voice. That's the best way I can describe it. It allows you to tell her how to interpret things. And right now, you can even make her whisper. You can make her yell. You can slow the pitch down to where she sounds male. You can do all these things. It's kind of amazing. You can spend a lot of time here. This is a great place for a front-end developer to also spend their time when there's no visual UI, is to see how much they can massage, or maybe it's you, massage how she sounds. Can you make her sound sarcastic? Can you make her sound happy? Can you make her sound angry? All these things. You can also have her spell things out whenever they come in. So it makes it really fun to play with. If you're interested in the spec for that, it's out on w3.org. And again, I will go ahead and throw that deck up at the very end of the session. So an example of expressive code might be here. So notice here where it says the type is SSML, right down here, okay? Right here, it just plays an additional audio file. SSML makes it possible for Alexa to do that, to interpret it that way. Or we can go ahead and mess with maybe my LCARS example, right? So out on GitHub, I actually have the entire skill available for you to fork and do what you'd like with. This is a complete skill, so that means it would pass the publishing test. And in here, it kind of tells you what it is that it covers and a sample conversation. Okay, so in this case, you know, I could say, Alexa, start LCARS.
Hello, this is Starship USS Enterprise.
How are you feeling?
Well, well, booyah.
So that's an example of using a speech con. It's like an emoticon, but
Please
for your
say
voice.
options if you need a list of commands.
Cancel.
Acknowledged.
Great. And you can play with this all day. It is great to go back and forth with it. And this, of course, just kind of tells you what you should expect in the sample conversation. It's lots of fun. If you're interested, go to github.com/Coraline, and it is one of the very first ones on the list here. Okay? Got it. All right. So now you've kind of seen that example. Let's kind of wrap things up with some additional references, okay? Intent sequencing. This is really important. Remember how we talked about this is stateless, which is how you should write your APIs, right? Our APIs should be stateless. Depends on the situation. But Alexa definitely is. She remembers nothing. So it's important that we take care of that. If you're interested in how to sequence it well, this is a great blog post that FreeBusy came out with. And if you want to play even more with the audio around SSML, this is also another great one. And again, just pointing out my LCARS example skill out on GitHub. And the last one is really interesting. So we know that Google Assistant is one of the major competitors for Alexa, right? Now, please understand, I love all NLP. I love all voice. There's a lot of great things that Google does, a lot of great things Amazon does, and Cortana as well. But when it comes to voice design, James Giangola just blew us away at Google I/O talking about what that means. And he goes into the kinds of conversations. Remember, we talked about conversational implicature, right? All those different things. It is excellent. It's well worth watching. It's only an hour. Invest the time. The person who inspired me to even start was Walter Casada, who is a great Pluralsight author, and he did this exact kind of implementation of what it meant to develop an Alexa skill in the .NET space. Right? And so that was done last year, and I've since just built on it from there, but he is a great one to follow there. And if you're interested in the slides, there's the bit.ly of my slides, so you can go ahead and grab that. But I think one of the most important things to kind of take away from this is that you need to keep your skills short and to the point. Okay? This is a huge deal. Remember the reviews. We need this to be really good. We need this to just do exactly what we need to do and be done, right? So for example, if I were to make a skill for a company, like a pizza company, I wouldn't want the skill to build a pizza. Oh my gosh, that is chatter back and forth and back and forth. No olives, with olives, I don't want this, I do want this. We usually don't change our taste preferences for pizza very often. So it makes sense to utilize a profile that you've already built for a user on a website and just say, when would you like your pizza? Because I already know what you want. And you say, how about now? Everybody's going to say now. Or maybe in an hour. And they say, got it, it's on its way. So not only have you taken care of the user in 2 steps or less, you've also charged their card. You already sent everything to the closest location to them. It's that auto magic to the user. This is why we will all have jobs in the next several years around voice, is because we're the ones who can implement that cool, smooth experience. But I have to convince you to spend the time on that and not say it has to be back and forth conversation, because that's not really what it's about. It needs to be short. It needs to be to the point. So this is a big one. Make sure that your code executes a response in less than 4.5 seconds. If it does not, then Alexa will tell the user, I'm sorry, the skill is not responsive, and that's it. It just dies. So that means no monoliths, no huge APIs, which is difficult because all of my clients have huge monolithic APIs. This is a great time to be like, let's just do a vertical slice here and see if I can just get my data maybe cached on a server somewhere so that it's faster for us to retrieve, or maybe just this kind of information. This is great to do a microservice, or extend your existing API and say, I just want to add a controller, right? Like what we did, we just added one for her, but the whole rest still exists. I could have referenced all of my other business logic and not had to rebuild it from scratch. All I really had to do was change how it sounds, right? How it's presented. So that's just the presentation layer is really what you're doing there. Make sure you adhere to voice design principles. I cannot stress this enough. As we're going and things are getting better and better and better in the world of voice, it's going to be important that we keep up as developers because there's no visual UI in voice. We are the designers. And so it's important that we lay everything out in ways that make sense. There's no errors in voice. Remember, no errors in voice. If you if-else these people, they will not use your skill. Okay? So it's important that you handle them better. That means this is our opportunity to kind of reevaluate the way that we write our code and how we structure it, right? So that we don't lose one of our users in the fray. And have fun with this. This is such a fun thing to do. You can do it in an hour. Clearly, we did it super fast here. You can break everything out, use whatever design pattern you want, and really extend this and make this beautiful, right? Do you see how fast it created that? That's why I chose .NET. That's why I chose Web API, because I could set that up in an API endpoint faster than almost any other platform, and I could just focus on what was the conversation, right? So don't come up with a voice idea. Instead, come up with an idea rooted in a problem that is best solved through voice. If you guys think about an idea, I want you to tweet me. There's my my Twitter handle up there in the right-hand corner, and talk to me about ideas that you have that would be best solved through that. I'm starting to compile a list of things that make sense, because when companies want to justify putting money towards the development of voice, this should be something that we can readily show them. This is why you should do this. These are the kinds of examples that we have. Thank you so much for the session, and stay curious. Right, so somebody had a question. Yes?
Last year when I was playing around with Alexa, we wanted to have Alexa write into Slack
Yeah.
and mention someone's name. And so what we found is we had to create a list of every single person's name that might be mentioned. Is there a way to have a placeholder for a name?
Yes, actually. So that is a good question. So when it comes to slot types, remember that data type that you were talking about, the question was, is there an open way to just say anything goes here, instead of saying here's a pre-populated list of acceptable options, right? There is. You have to train it, but that option absolutely exists. So it's one of those things that that means that you have to train a response to a 1 word, to a 2 words, to 3 words, to 4 words, and you have to train those responses there, and then it will accept anything. A good example of this would be when I wrote a skill for our local transit. So here, you guys have a great train system. Awesome, I like it. Maybe you want to know when the next one's going. And so in order for that to work, there are so many possible locations you could be going to, and at least where I live, and we had a bus system. So I can't pre-populate a list of every single destination. That's just crazy talk. So in this case, I used one of their generic data types that allowed you to train it, and I could say any address I wanted. I could say any address I wanted. I could say just the name of a business. I could say a geographic location, and we just hooked it up to the Google Maps API, and it handled the string. So that's what we did there, and that's exactly how we handled that. Now, it's better to know a little bit about your user, so maybe you can handle some of that stuff in the background and not force them to leave it open. But it's good to be able to. I agree with you there, especially in that choose your own adventure kind of situation where you need to repeat things back. For example, Alexa, open LCARS.
Hello, this is Starship USS Enterprise.
Set course for Starbase STS. Oh, sorry.
Yes, Commander.
Set course for Starbase STS-112 Warp 7.
Course laid in for STS-112. Ready at your command.
Engage. Just for you. Now I trained this part right here because it could have been any Starbase. And
Please say options if you need a list of commands.
Cancel.
Acknowledged.
Right, so in that case, I went ahead and just did a generic slot there, okay? And there's a lot more information about that on the data types section of Alexa's documentation. That is a great question. Anybody else? Yes?
Can you combine Alexa with Microsoft Lewis language and extend them?
Oh yeah, I could use, the question was, can I combine Alexa with any other kinds of,
Like Lewis from Microsoft?
like Lewis, right, from Microsoft. You can do whatever you want. Now remember, because of that generic slot type that we talked about, absolutely. You do not get the audio right now because there are legal ramifications for Amazon to release the audio piece to you. And so because you don't have the audio, you can do text analysis on it if we use that generic slot type and send it over. Yeah, so I did stuff with Microsoft Cognitive Services, for example. I wanted to be able to predict how angry somebody was when they were interacting with my skill. You know, based on the things they said, did they use profanity? If there's nothing else to take away from this, it's this. You have to allow it, because what will make somebody madder saying, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said, when they say your sample utterance plus some sort of expletive, or if you just handle and give them the data that they requested, and maybe with an additional sorry about that, right? There's a lot of power in this. We can totally do all of this and make this not suck. So I highly suggest that you guys make voice to sign amazing. So thank you again, and I'll take questions out in the hall.